A bit later, we're going to update the situation in China. The world is eager to evaluate the communist government's response to the mass uprisings there. But in Western China, there's another people's protest that we rarely hear much about. It long ago triggered Chinese military action and ongoing retaliation. A generation ago, China invaded Tibet, claiming it belonged to China. The result was the decimation of an entire culture and enormous upheaval for the Tibetans, particularly Tibetan monks. Their revered leader is the Dalai Lama, and his story is his people's story.
BBC World Service, the news. This is London.
Before dawn, he listens to the BBC, dreading the news from his troubled homeland. This day's report is especially bad.
After the violence of the past few days in Tibet, the imposition of martial law by
He comes from Tibet, and he has many names. The precious jewel, ocean of wisdom, protector of the land of snows. To his people, he is more than a king. He is a god on earth. For Tibetans, he holds greater importance than the Pope has for Catholics. Few leaders in history are so worshipped, yet this monarch owns no passport. Officially, the Dalai Lama is a Tibetan refugee living in exile in Dharamsala, a forgotten British hill station on the edge of the Himalayas in northern India. This day marks a grim anniversary for the small Tibetan community here in India. 30 years ago, the Tibetan people openly staged a rebellion against Chinese occupation of Tibet. Foreseeing Chinese retaliation, the Dalai Lama was forced to flee to India. Every March 10th since, he has delivered a kind of State of the Union address from exile in Dharamsala.
According to our information, I think it is more than 400,000 Tibetan killed in military action, and more than 600,000 is Tibetan disappear due to starvation, or due to torture, or as a labor camp, things like that.
The Dalai Lama's pleas for an international protest against the human rights abuses of his countrymen still living in Tibet under Chinese rule have changed very little over the years. And the chants from the exiled Tibetans in India echo the demonstrations in Lhasa, Tibet's capital city. But in Lhasa, demonstrators are risking their lives. Reports of this year's demonstrations describe some of the most violent police retaliation ever. Over 170,000 troops are continuing to keep martial law in Lhasa. In an effort to see conditions in Tibet for ourselves, we asked the Chinese government for visas. And after a month of stalling, our request was denied. Since then, there have been unconfirmed reports of executions, widespread imprisonment, and torture as a response to peaceful demonstrations by Tibetans in Lhasa. And all foreigners, journalists, and tourists have been expelled from Tibet. The struggle between Tibet and China dates back many centuries. China has always coveted Tibet, the Forbidden Kingdom, hidden on a remote plateau in the Himalayas. It is said to be the inspiration for the mythical place called Shangri-La, a utopian society inaccessible to Westerners. Tibetans are a highly spiritual people. There's a higher percentage of monks in the Tibetan population than in any other country in the world. Their leader, the Dalai Lama, is believed to be the living Buddha, the direct incarnation of the Lord of Compassion who founded Tibetan Buddhism. After the death of the 13th Dalai Lama, a special team of monks scoured the country for signs of the reincarnated Dalai Lama. They found a successor in 2-year-old Lamo Tandap.
When you see searching party reach my place, there are 3 candidates. And then it seems to say, I perform, I think, quite effectively. So I choose as a reincarnation.
Lamo Tandup and his family were moved from their simple farmhouse to the Potala, the opulent palace in Lhasa, where amid elaborate ceremonies, he became Tibet's spiritual and political leader. He was a god, a king, and still a boy. His playmates were the adult servants in the palace.
Usually, you see, they have deep respect for me.
Yeah.
But when we play, you see, they never accept their defeat.
I see. Oh, that's very
They
good.
play very forcefully.
They played it for
Sometimes,
real.
you see, I mean, due to, you see, their boldness, sometimes I cry.
Oh, is that right? Oh, really? The young Dalai Lama spent much of his childhood in isolation, peering out at a world he could not be part of. Secluded in the Potala, he would spend many hours gazing through these same binoculars at the children playing below. But life in Shangri-La soon disintegrated. By the time the young Dalai Lama was 16, Tibetan-Chinese relations were strained past the breaking point, and he was swept up in the worst conflict in the history of his people.
The counterattack begins. Our troops attack and occupy the rebel positions on Yowang Hill.
Tibet was being liberated, according to the Chinese newsreel announcers in 1950. The Tibetans said they were being invaded, and their country was being decimated. Tibetans charge that over 6,000 monasteries have been dismantled, that over 60% of Tibetan historic literature and art has been destroyed, and that their unique culture has been abolished in their own country. His life threatened, the Dalai Lama left the palace disguised as a soldier. This is film of the actual escape to India. He was not only fleeing for his life, he was taking Tibet's culture with him to keep it alive. In 1959, when so much had happened and it was necessary for you to save the government and leave, what was it like when you escaped from Tibet?
I think that decision is something right, although very sad.
The Dalai Lama's daily routine starts in the pre-dawn hours with some 100 prostrations in respect for Buddha. He is an accomplished scholar, having earned the highest degree in Buddhist philosophy. He has taken a vow of celibacy. His teachings are translated into many languages. The sessions always begin with tea for everyone and chanting, a form of meditation. The Dalai Lama travels extensively, in fact, more than any other Dalai Lama in history. But pilgrims still journey to Dharamsala from all over the world. They are drawn there not only for Buddhist teachings, but out of respect for one of the world's great statesmen. For the past 20 years, the stories of the human rights abuses in the Dalai Lama's homeland continued to mount. In 1979, the Chinese finally allowed a fact-finding delegation to visit. The reception for the group, which merely represented the Dalai Lama without his presence, was overwhelming. He had not been forgotten in his 25-year absence. The team heard specific allegations of genocide from the Tibetans, that the Chinese are performing forced abortions on Tibetans, and that with the huge influx of Chinese, Tibetans are outnumbered 3-1, making them a minority in their own land. ABC correspondent Todd Carroll asked Yang Hudi, representative of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Beijing, to comment on reports of human rights violations.
The Constitution of the People's Republic of China stipulates that actions that affect the solidarity of nationalities and split the country must be banned. Such behavior must be punished in accordance with the law.
But as refugees continued to escape to India, they added to the accounts of human rights violations. Recent arrivals Sonam Babyal and Nima Asang had spent several years in prison.
They tried to burn me alive and throw me into the river. They did everything to me. It was not because I committed crimes of stealing, robbery, lying, but it was purely political reasons.
Refugee Nima Asang says he was also a political prisoner for 22 years.
Chinese treatment of Tibetan prisoners is beyond human understanding. Sanitation, nutritional diet, medical attention, and clothing were non-existent. Human flesh, horse, and dog meat were part of our diets. 90% of the prison population lost their lives because of execution and starvation.
There is only one prison in the whole region of Tibet and 2 reformatories. The prisoners add up to 900. They were put into prison because of violation of law. They are criminals.
This tape, shot last year by Chinese police, was never intended to be shown publicly. It was reportedly smuggled out of Tibet at great risk. Said to have been evidence used to prosecute Tibetans involved in demonstrations, it also provides evidence of the methods used by the Chinese. Tibetans say that in this attack, 30 monks were slain. And they claim that over 1.2 million of their countrymen, approximately 17% of the total population, has been killed since the Chinese invasion. The Chinese deny these allegations and all accusations of human rights abuse in Tibet. Were you disappointed at all that President Bush, when he visited China, didn't bring up the subject of human rights?
Yes, of course. You see, sometimes the people, you see, let's say, I mean, consider Tibetan is not, how to say, not as a human being of this world.
Many Tibetans, particularly the youth, believe that an armed revolution is the only way to stop Chinese oppression. But like Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama advocates strict nonviolence.
I always telling Tibetans, especially you see, younger people who have some you see, militant, how to say, idea. So you see, we must follow, you see, sort of say, strict nonviolent nature. Through that way, you see, we can change Chinese attitude, Chinese mind.
In spite of the violent attacks against his people, the Dalai Lama has never compromised his belief in a peaceful solution. He remains their hope for the future.
You see, whether we like it or not, we have to live side by side. So once you develop genuine compassion, forgiveness, then people also you see, equally respond. Under such circumstances, usually I call genuine sense of universal responsibility on the basis of love and kindness is the key factor for future development. So this is a question of human survival, not just mere question of religion.
With the culture of Tibet safely preserved around him in Dharamsala, he has spent most of his life praying for the Chinese and waiting for a peaceful return to his home across the Himalayas. His strength lies in his spiritual insight. He has said, no matter how strong the wind of evil may blow, the flame of truth can never be extinguished. You know, to spend time with the Dalai Lama is to get a glimpse of a more than impressive human being. He is maybe the most genuine human being I ever met, because he has no, when I think of the yarns he could spin for the devout if he were a phony, but he's not. He claims no memories of previous incarnations. He displays no insecurity or arrogance, and he has a real concern for all people. Remarkable.
You know, they won't let you into Tibet now, and they wouldn't let me in now, but 2 years ago, as you know, I did go, and the Patala, his home, is now a tourist attraction, and to see the way the Tibetans still revere him, what they wanted most was, did I just have a postcard of him? The love, the devotion that these people feel. The Chinese may be able to wipe out the people individually, but they can't wipe out that spirit.
I think not, and he is preserving the Tibetan culture there in Dharamsala, and we hope he does so indefinitely.
Even if he's never able to go back himself. Well, next we're